Hey, don't touch that swing. My kids are playing there, I shouted, running barefoot across the yard. The morning sun had barely risen, but two men in dark blue HOA vests were already in my backyard, unbolting the wooden frame my late husband built. One of them looked up from his drill, gave a lazy smirk, and said, "Orders from President Dalton." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The swing swayed gently, one rope already cut, my daughter clutching the other, tears running down her cheeks. "Mommy, why are they taking Daddy's swing?" she sobbed. The men didn't answer. They just kept working, metal clanging against metal like a slow, cruel rhythm. I felt anger rising in my chest, trembling hands clenched around my phone. "You can't just come onto my property without notice," I yelled, recording the scene. The taller one turned toward me, name tag flashing. H. Klein, HOA maintenance. He shrugged. "Talk to Dalton. We're just following orders." That name, Dalton. It had been on every HOA newsletter, every community memo. Rick Dalton, president of Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. I'd only met him once at a welcome meeting. Late 50s, tan, always in a polo, a salesman's smile that never reached his eyes. He talked more about maintaining uniform standards than welcoming families. I didn't like him then. I hated him now. By the time I got outside, they'd already unbolted the main beam. One of the ropes snapped under tension, sending the wooden seat crashing into the dirt. My son gasped. I stepped in front of the swing. "You're not taking another piece," I said, blocking their way. One of them sighed, muttering into his radio. "We got a problem. The homeowner's resisting." Minutes later, Rick Dalton himself appeared, strolling into my yard like he owned it. "Mrs. Miller," he said coolly, "you received our letter about unauthorized structures, didn't you?" "No," I snapped. "You never sent me anything." "This is my property." He smiled that same smug grin. "Not entirely. You agreed to Maple Creek's aesthetic standards when you moved in. The swing violates Section 4.2, unapproved exterior modifications." I stared at him, shaking. "It's a swing for my kids. My husband built it before he—" I couldn't finish. He didn't care. Rick raised an eyebrow. "Rules are rules. Remove it by sundown, or we'll fine you $500. I wanted to scream, to rip the clipboard from his hand. Instead, I picked up the swing seat. Rough wood, worn smooth from years of small hands and laughter. My husband carved his initials into it before the accident. Now they were being treated like graffiti. When the men finally left, the yard looked wounded. Holes in the ground, bolts scattered, ropes frayed. My daughter knelt beside the swing, whispering to it as if it could still hold her. I stood behind her, staring at the empty spot, wondering what kind of world punishes a child's laughter. From across the street, curtains shifted. Neighbors watched but said nothing. One man turned away when I caught his eye. That silence hurt more than Dalton's smirk. As dusk fell, I walked out again to collect the broken pieces. The air smelled of metal and sawdust. My husband's scent from long ago. And then I saw it. A yellow HOA citation nailed directly into the wooden seat. The words, "Non-compliant structure, $500 fine," printed across my husband's carved initials. That's when I realized this wasn't about a swing. It was about power. And Rick Dalton had just declared war on me. Failure to comply will result in a lien against your property. The letter on my door wasn't a warning. It was a threat. The crisp, cream-colored paper looked almost harmless. Embossed Maple Creek Estates logo at the top. Official signature at the bottom. But the words in between dripped with cold authority. Unauthorized exterior modification. Failure to remove within 7 days may result in legal action, fines, or property lien. I read it 3 times, my hands trembling. They were threatening my home, over a swing that wasn't even standing anymore. The kids were still inside finishing breakfast when I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the HOA office. The building sat at the edge of the neighborhood, tucked behind manicured hedges and a members-only sign. Fitting, I thought, for a place built to keep people out. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of printer toner and disinfectant. A young receptionist looked up from her computer, barely glancing at me. Can I help you? Yes, I said, holding up the letter. I need to speak with Rick Dalton. She hesitated, then pressed a button on her phone. Mr. Dalton? Mrs. Miller is here about a violation notice. A few moments later, Rick appeared from his glass office, all confidence and cologne. Mrs. Miller, he said smoothly, I was wondering when you'd come in. I placed the letter on his desk. You can't threaten a line over a children's swing. You had no right to come onto my property without notice. Rick leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. We didn't threaten anything, Mrs. Miller. We informed you. There's a difference. His tone was calm, almost bored, but there was something cruel in the way he smiled. You agreed to abide by Maple Creek's community standards when you signed your deed. You'll either learn the rules or lose your privileges. Privileges, I repeated, my voice rising. You think living here is a privilege? I pay my dues like everyone else. Rick's eyes narrowed slightly. Most homeowners prefer not to argue. They understand that rules preserve value. Or protect your wallet, I muttered. He ignored the jab. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board meeting. I stood there for a second, pulse pounding in my ears. He didn't just dismiss me. He dismissed my family's memory, my husband's work, my dignity. I turned without another word and walked out, the sound of my shoes echoing on the polished floor. When I got home, the house felt smaller, like the walls themselves were closing in under all that legal weight. I sat at the kitchen table, spreading the letter open, tracing each line like it might reveal a secret. Lien, non-compliance, enforcement authority. The language was deliberately intimidating, designed to make people surrender before they even ask questions. That's when I remembered something from a neighbor's Facebook group, a post about homeowner rights. I searched the state website and found it. Under state HOA law, homeowners must receive notice and a hearing before fines are imposed. Rick had ignored both. I grabbed my phone and started documenting everything. Photographs of the swing's remains, copies of every notice, timestamps, even audio notes describing encounters. If he wanted a fight, I'd make sure every word was recorded. Later that night, as the kids slept, I sat by the window, staring out into the quiet cul-de-sac. The streetlights flickered, shadows stretching across the driveway. I could almost hear my husband's voice, calm, steady, reassuring. Always stand your ground, Sarah. Bullies fold when you shine a light on them. I whispered back, I'm trying. Then sometime after midnight, I heard a light tap against the front door. My heart froze. I opened it slowly, half expecting to see someone there. But the porch was empty. Only a new notice taped in red ink fluttered in the breeze. 48 hours to remove structure or face legal action. They weren't just enforcing rules anymore. They were declaring war. Don't sit near her. She's the one fighting Rick. I overheard at the pool. Overnight, I became the neighborhood villain. The words hit harder than I expected. I stood there in my flip-flops, holding my kids' towels, pretending not to hear. A mother I'd once chatted with at the playground turned her back, whispering something to her husband. A few feet away, another mom herded her kids out of the pool, shooting me a pitying look, as if I were contagious. The water rippled behind them, leaving my children playing alone, oblivious to the quiet wall of judgment forming around us. That weekend, the air in Maple Creek felt different. Polite smiles replaced with cold silence. Neighbors who used to wave now avoided eye contact. The HOA's gossip network was faster than any newspaper. I could practically feel Rick's fingerprints on every rumor. She's unstable. She threatened the board. She's refusing to follow community guidelines. Lies, all of them. The isolation sank in fast. Even my kids noticed. Why won't Mia come over anymore? My daughter asked. I didn't have the heart to tell her that Mia's mother was scared of losing access to the community clubhouse if she stayed friends with us. A few days later, I met Linda Carter. She was watering her roses when I passed by, her yard filled with soft pink blooms that stood out against the rows of sterile, regulation-approved shrubs. Beautiful day, I said, trying to sound normal. Linda looked up, studying me quietly before speaking. "You're Sarah Miller, right? The one with the swing?" I nodded. She lowered her voice. "You're not wrong to fight him, you know." That stopped me cold. "You mean Rick?" She nodded again. "He's been doing this for years. You're not his first target." We sat on her porch that afternoon, sipping iced tea while she told me the stories that never made it into HOA newsletters. A retired Army veteran named Tom Willis had built a small tool shed behind his house. Rick claimed it violated the Uniform Property Standard and fined him until he couldn't keep up. Eventually, Tom sold his home to a company Rick later advised in the sale. My jaw tightened. "He's been using the HOA to push people out?" Linda nodded gravely. "Anyone who questions him. He hides behind bylaws, but it's always personal." Her voice carried a mix of anger and fear. "He likes control. The board never challenges him. They're either afraid or benefiting somehow." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, scrolling through HOA documents, board meeting notes, old notices. It was all there: patterns of fines, property seizures, and selective enforcement. I began creating a spreadsheet: homeowner names, dates, reasons, penalties. It was messy but revealing. Rick's fingerprints were everywhere. Legal nugget: I learned that selective enforcement, applying HOA rules unequally, is illegal in most states. Every regulation must apply to everyone, not just the ones who speak up. And Rick had been breaking that rule for years. As the days passed, tension around me thickened. People I once trusted stopped responding to texts. One man whispered, "You don't know what Rick can do," before hurrying off. It wasn't just fear, it was submission. Rick had turned the entire neighborhood into a quiet, obedient machine. But then, one night, as I was cleaning up dinner, a soft sound broke the silence: the shuffle of paper under my front door. I walked over and picked up a folded printout. The header read, "Maple Creek Estates HOA internal email." My heart pounded as I read the line highlighted in yellow. "Rick authorized vendor contract. Bypassed board vote. Personal approval sufficient." It was signed by Rick himself. Linda's warning echoed in my head. He wasn't just enforcing rules, he was profiting from them. "You didn't hear this from me," Linda whispered, sliding a paper across the cafe table. Rick's signature was there, tied to a fake vendor company. The cafe was half empty that morning, the kind of quiet where whispers carried. I unfolded the document, my hands trembling slightly from the caffeine and nerves. Across the top, in clean, bold letters, it read, "Maintenance Service Agreement, Maple Creek Estates HOA." But what made my pulse quicken was the name beneath the vendor line: Dalton Property Management, LLC. Rick's last name, his company. "This is impossible," I murmured, scanning the signature block again. There it was, Richard A. Dalton, signed twice. Once as HOA president, once as the vendor. Linda leaned forward, her eyes darting around the room. "He's been paying himself through community dues. That maintenance fee everyone complains about, it's going straight into his own pocket." My stomach churned. The swing incident suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't about paint colors or neighborhood aesthetics. It was about distraction. He targeted me to keep attention off his scam. The fines, the public humiliation, the threats, all to silence anyone who might dig too deep. I folded the paper, sliding it into my purse like a live grenade. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "A friend on the board," Linda said quietly. "She's terrified, but she couldn't watch him keep getting away with it." I spent the rest of the day in my car outside a print shop downtown, scanning and copying every page. My hands shook each time the machine hummed. I made 5 sets. One for me, one for Linda, one for the county clerk, one for the HOA ombudsman, and one I hid in my safe at home. By evening, my mind was spinning with questions. How long had he been doing this? How many people had lost their homes to his greed? And how many of those vendor payments were quietly lining his pockets? Legal nugget. Under state HOA law, Board members must disclose any financial interest in contracts they approve. Failure to do so isn't just unethical, it's considered fraud and grounds for removal. Rick had broken that law in writing. When I got home, I logged into the HOA portal to download more records. But my password no longer worked. I tried resetting it. Account not found. Panic surged. They'd cut off my access. A few minutes later, my home Wi-Fi went down completely. My provider confirmed the outage was local. Scheduled maintenance, they said. But the timing was too perfect. It hit me then. Rick knew. I sat in the dark living room, laptop closed, watching the faint blue glow from the streetlights creep through the blinds. Every noise made me jump. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards. My kids were asleep, blissfully unaware that their mother was sitting guard over a pile of papers that could destroy a man's empire. Fear settled heavy in my chest. What if he retaliated harder? What if this didn't end in a courtroom, but in my driveway? I'd read stories, people's tires slashed, anonymous complaints to their employers, lost paperwork at the county office. I locked the doors twice and slipped the documents under my mattress, praying I was overreacting. Just after midnight, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. No subject line, no sender name, just one sentence in the message body. If you value your home, stop digging. My throat went dry. This wasn't just a corrupt HOA president anymore. This was a man with something to hide, and now he knew I was the one who could expose him. "Mom, someone spray painted our yard," my son cried. The words "rule breaker" glared at us in thick orange paint across our freshly cut grass. For a moment, I thought it had to be a mistake, a cruel prank by neighborhood kids. But as I stepped closer, my heart sank. The letters were too neat, too deliberate. Someone had walked right up to my home in broad daylight and branded it like a scarlet letter. I took photos from every angle, my hands shaking. The smell of paint still hung heavy in the air. It was fresh, hours old, maybe less. My daughter clung to my leg, whispering, "Did we do something bad, Mommy?" I couldn't answer. I wanted to tell her it was just paint, but I knew better. This was Rick Dalton's message. I called the HOA office immediately. The same receptionist from before answered, her tone detached. "I'd like to report vandalism on my property," I said firmly. Her reply was rehearsed. "The HOA doesn't handle private property disputes. You'll need to contact local law enforcement." "You're kidding," I said. The vandal wrote "rule breaker," your president's favorite phrase. She hesitated, then sighed. "We can't speculate on motives, Mrs. Miller." Click. The line went dead. That afternoon, I drove to the hardware store and bought 2 security cameras. One for the front yard, one for the side gate. I wasn't going to sit quietly while someone terrorized my family. The moment they were mounted, a strange calm came over me. Maybe now, I thought, I could prove what was really happening. 2 nights later, I got my proof. At 2:03 a.m., the motion sensor on the front camera triggered. When I checked the playback the next morning, I froze. There he was, a tall man, same build as Rick, same walk, wearing a baseball cap and dark jacket. He paused in front of my mailbox for several seconds, then turned and walked away. I downloaded the footage and called the sheriff's office. The deputy came by that afternoon, took my statement, and filed a harassment report. "We can't accuse him without a clear face," he warned, "but keep recording. You're doing the right thing." Legal nugget. In most single-party consent states, homeowners are fully within their rights to record video and audio on their own property, especially for evidence of trespassing or harassment. For the first time, I felt like I had leverage, evidence, proof, something tangible to fight back with. The next morning, I went out to grab the newspaper and stopped cold. My mailbox was open, its hinge twisted. The small metal USB drive I'd stored the footage on was gone. Nothing else was touched. No mail, no packages, just the drive. I felt my stomach turn. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Before noon, Another letter appeared on my doorstep, this one with the HOA seal in bright blue. Inside was a new fine. $200 for unauthorized surveillance equipment. The irony nearly made me laugh. They were punishing me for protecting my own family. I called Rick's office, my voice shaking with rage. "You stole my footage." He chuckled on the other end. "Now, Mrs. Miller, that's quite an accusation. I'd be careful about making baseless claims." The smugness in his tone made my blood boil. "You can fine me all you want," I snapped, "but I'm not taking those cameras down." There was a pause, then his voice dropped to a chilling calm. "Then I suppose I'll see you at the compliance hearing next week." When I hung up, my hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the phone. I looked out the window, half expecting to see him standing there. But the street was quiet, too quiet. The HOA notice on my counter read in bold letters, "Mandatory compliance hearing. Next Tuesday, 9 a.m. It wasn't a meeting. It was a setup. The clerk warned, "Once you open this, you can't unsee it." Inside, Rick's name tied to multiple shell companies. The county building smelled like dust and old paper. The kind of place where secrets sat in manila folders waiting for someone brave enough to find them. I stood at the counter, clutching the slip of paper I'd filled out for records retrieval, my heart pounding. The woman behind the desk, mid-60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice that sounded more like a warning than small talk, gave me a long look before sliding over a thick folder. "Public record," she said quietly. "But not everyone who pulls these files likes what they find." I nodded, taking the folder to an empty desk near the window. My hands trembled as I flipped it open. Maple Creek Estates, HOA vendor filings. At first, it looked like normal paperwork. Maintenance contracts, landscaping invoices, budgets. But then, halfway through I saw it. Dalton Property Management, LLC. My eyes darted to the owner's line. Registered agent, Richard A. Dalton. There it was. Proof. The man who fined me, humiliated me, vandalized my property, and terrorized my family had also been quietly funneling HOA dues into his own pocket through fake companies. Each page led deeper down the rabbit hole. Multiple LLCs, all linked to Rick's name, all created within months of him becoming HOA president. Landscaping, maintenance, security. He'd built an empire of ghost businesses and paid himself from everyone. The walls of the records room suddenly felt closer. It wasn't just corruption. It was theft, fraud, and manipulation woven together in plain sight. And my swing? It had been the spark that risked exposing it all. I whispered to myself, "This is why he came after me. He needed a distraction." Legal nugget. County clerk and recorder offices hold public access documents, contracts, liens, business registrations, available to any citizen. You don't need permission to uncover the truth. It's your right. I flagged every document with Rick's name, copied them at the self-service machine, and slipped them into a manila envelope. With a permanent marker, I wrote, "For press," in bold letters across the front. I didn't know which reporter would get it yet, but someone would. On the drive home, the world felt sharper, the sunlight harsher, the sounds louder. I rolled the window down, needing air, but it did nothing to ease the unease building in my gut. When I checked the rearview mirror at a red light, my breath caught. A black SUV was behind me, tinted windows, no visible plates, moving too close. I turned down Oak Street. It turned too. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. My heart thudded in my ears as I made another turn, then another. It stayed with me, steady, unhurried. I reached for my phone, but of course, no signal. The same network issue that had started after I found the contract. I took a deep breath and drove toward home, forcing myself to stay calm. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just paranoia. But when I slowed at my subdivision's gate, the SUV slowed too. Then, as I turned into Maple Creek, it idled for a moment before peeling off down the next street. The sound of its engine faded, but my pulse didn't. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky had gone from gold to gray. I sat there for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a target. And Rick Dalton, the man who had declared war over a swing, had just realized I was the one who could end him. "Sit down, Mrs. Miller," Rick barked. "I won't," I said, voice shaking but steady. "Not until you explain your harassment." Every eye in the Maple Creek clubhouse was on me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the air thick with tension and chlorine from the nearby pool. Rick stood at the front of the room, his polo shirt crisp, his smug smile gone. The room was filled with neighbors, some angry, some scared, all waiting to see if I'd finally break. Rick slammed his palm on the podium. "You're out of order," he snapped. "This is a compliance meeting, not a pity party." I met his glare head on. "No, this is a neighborhood meeting and I'm a homeowner. You don't get to threaten people with fines just because you don't like them." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A few people looked away, but others, the ones who'd been fined before, nodded subtly. I took a breath and reached into my folder. "You fined me for a swing, for cameras, even for landscaping, but not the same violations when your friends do them. That's called selective enforcement, and it's illegal under state HOA law." Rick's jaw tightened. "You think you understand the law?" I opened the folder wider, revealing a printed excerpt. "Actually, I do. And under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, what you're doing, these threats of foreclosure and harassment, is intimidation. You're breaking federal law." He laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "You really think anyone's going to believe you over me?" The laughter didn't reach his eyes this time. I pulled out my phone, discreetly pressing record. "Maybe not," I said. "But this will." The tension cracked. Someone in the back whispered, "She's recording." And for the first time, Rick looked nervous. His eyes darted toward the board members behind him. But none came to his rescue. "You'll regret this," he muttered, leaning close enough for only the first few rows to hear. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I stared him down. "Neither do you." The meeting broke apart in a storm of murmurs. Neighbors shuffled out, some avoiding my eyes, others whispering words of encouragement. Rick gathered his papers, refusing to look at me. I walked out into the night air, my body trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. What would you do if your HOA president humiliated you publicly? Would you stand up or stay silent? By the time I got home, the adrenaline had worn off. My body felt heavy, my voice hoarse from shouting. I tucked my kids into bed, kissed their foreheads, and told myself it was almost over, that the truth was finally starting to show. But the next morning shattered that illusion. There, taped to my front door in red ink, was a new notice. Foreclosure intent. Non-payment of HOA dues. My breath caught. They weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to take everything. "You've been illegally threatened with foreclosure," my lawyer said, flipping through the papers. "He's bluffing, and he's breaking the law." For the first time in weeks, I felt the air return to my lungs. I sat across from James Bennett, an HOA abuse attorney whose office walls were lined with framed verdicts and news clippings about homeowners who fought back and won. He was in his early 40s, calm but sharp-eyed, the kind of man who measured every word before speaking. "I've seen cases like this before," he continued, scanning the notice Rick had posted on my door. "The signature's wrong. The board's not copied, and there's no lien authorization on record." He tapped the document with his pen. "Dalton filed this himself, without board approval." I blinked. "You mean, this isn't even real?" "Oh, it's real enough to scare you," Bennett said, leaning back. "But legally? It's worthless." He overstepped his authority. The words felt like sunlight breaking through months of clouds. For so long, Rick's power had felt untouchable. But here, in black and white, was proof that his threats had no legal standing. Legal nugget. Under state HOA statutes, presidents cannot unilaterally file liens or foreclosure notices. Such actions must be approved by the full board and recorded with the county. Anything less is fraudulent enforcement. "So what do we do now?" I asked. Bennett smiled slightly. That confident kind of smile lawyers have when they already see the checkmate ahead. We hit back. I'll file an injunction to freeze any collection activity. Then we'll submit a whistleblower complaint to the state HOA ombudsman. That'll force them to open an investigation. An investigation? I repeated, stunned. Oh yes, he said. And once that starts, Dalton's gonna have to explain every missing dollar in your HOA budget. I laughed. An exhausted, shaky sound that surprised me. You mean I can actually fight him? Bennett nodded. You're not just fighting him, you're exposing him. I left his office with a folder of legal forms and a feeling I hadn't had in months. Hope. When I got home, my kids were in the yard again, chasing each other around the bare patch where the swing once stood. For the first time since the nightmare began, I didn't feel powerless watching them. I felt like maybe, just maybe, we'd win this. That night, I sat at the kitchen table drafting a statement with Bennett's guidance. I detailed every incident, the vandalism, the missing footage, the false finds. It felt like taking control of my story again, one paragraph at a time. But peace never lasts long in Maple Creek. The next morning, while making breakfast, I heard the familiar ping of a new email. It was from the HOA's administrative address, the same one that usually sent meeting notes or maintenance reminders. The subject line read, "Confidential, property transfer plan.pdf." I frowned, opening it cautiously. The document loaded slowly, my screen filling with columns of addresses and signatures. My eyes stopped on line 12. Lot 49, Sarah Miller. Pending transfer approval. My address, my name. The file showed Rick's digital signature at the bottom, approving property reassignment upon foreclosure completion. My house, my home, was already on a list of properties he intended to reallocate. A chill swept over me. This wasn't just about silencing me anymore. He was planning to take my house, legally or not, and hand it off to one of his companies. I forwarded the file to Bennett immediately with one line. "He's selling my home before I've even lost it." Within minutes, he replied, "Don't panic. This is the smoking gun we needed." I looked out my window at the quiet street, the trimmed lawns, the perfect facades hiding corruption underneath. For the first time, I wasn't scared. I was ready for war. "Let him think you're ready to sell," Bennett whispered. Across the street, Rick watched from behind his sunglasses, leaning casually against his car like he owned the block. The plan felt dangerous, but it was the only way to expose him. Bennett had looped in a local journalist, Emily Torres, from the County Herald. She specialized in community corruption stories, the kind that made small-town crooks sweat under public scrutiny. Together, they'd orchestrated a sting that would capture Rick in his own arrogance. "He's obsessed with control," Emily had told me when we met at a diner the night before. "If he thinks he's winning, he'll talk. Men like that always do." So the setup was simple. I'd pretend I was done fighting. I'd tell Rick I couldn't afford the legal mess anymore and was ready to sell the house. Quietly, off the books, to avoid embarrassment. Rick, hungry for an easy acquisition, would show up to gloat. Cameras would roll. The morning of the sting, I could barely eat. The air felt heavier than usual, humid and tense. I walked around the house with Bennett one last time as he tested the equipment. 2 tiny hidden cameras, one nestled inside the decorative birdhouse on the porch, another disguised as a lamp in the living room. A backup recorder sat in my pocket. Legal nugget. In most single-party consent states, recording a conversation is legal as long as one participant, in this case, me, knows and agrees to it. We weren't breaking the law. Rick was about to break himself. At 3 p.m. sharp, Rick's shiny black Escalade pulled up in front of my house. I took a deep breath, wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans, and opened the door before he could even knock. "Mr. Dalton," I said smoothly, forcing a polite smile. "Come in." He grinned, that same smug, self-assured grin that had haunted me for months. "I knew you'd come around eventually, Mrs. Miller." He stepped inside like he owned the place, his cologne sharp, his confidence sharper. "Fighting the HOA never ends well," It's smarter to move on. I gestured toward the couch. Coffee? He waved it off, scanning my living room instead. Nice house. Shame about the fines. Most folks would have lost this place already. He chuckled, settling into the chair across from me. But don't worry. I've got investors lined up. We could close fast. I kept my expression neutral, though inside my heart pounded like a drum. Investors? Oh, sure, he said, crossing one leg over the other. Developers, mostly. We buy up undervalued properties, flip them, and bring in new families. Cleaner ones. The HOA benefits, the neighborhood looks better, everyone wins. Cleaner ones, I repeated softly. You mean people who don't question you? He smirked. You catch on quick. I leaned forward. So you've done this before? He laughed. Plenty of times. Some people just can't follow the rules, and that's fine. We have ways of clearing out the troublemakers. The words hung in the air like poison. My fingers brushed against the hidden recorder in my pocket, steadying it as it captured every word. You use your HOA position to force people out? I asked, keeping my tone light, almost admiring. Rick shrugged. Call it what you want. They sign the contracts. I just enforce them. He had no idea he was signing his own confession. From the corner of the room, I saw a faint red blink from the lamp. The camera light, invisible to him but a beacon to me. Bennett and Emily were in a van down the street, watching the feed live. Rick leaned back, looking smug, relaxed, victorious. Honestly, Sarah, this all could have been easier. You're smart, attractive, hard-working. I almost felt bad making an example out of you. My throat tightened, but I didn't flinch. Almost, he smiled. Almost. Outside, a car door clicked, the signal from Bennett that they had what they needed. I stood up, forcing a steady tone. You've said enough, Mr. Dalton. He looked confused for the first time. Excuse me? I turned toward the door, my voice calm but final. This meeting's over. But he wasn't done talking. Not yet. He smirked again and muttered under his breath. You'd be surprised what I can still make disappear. And just like that, the camera caught the line that would change everything. Sign the transfer, and I'll erase your fines, Rick said, sliding the papers across my kitchen table. I smiled, keeping my voice even. Funny thing, Rick. You just confessed on camera. For a split second, his expression froze. That smug, unbreakable mask cracking just enough to reveal the panic underneath. Then his eyes darted around the room. What are you talking about? I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. You've been recording this whole conversation, I said, pointing toward the corner lamp. And that's not all. The county's been notified. The ombudsman's office has your contracts. You're done, Rick. He laughed. Too loud, too forced. You think anyone's gonna take the word of a hysterical widow over the HOA president? I stood up slowly, the birdhouse camera outside catching every word. You're not a president anymore. You're a criminal. That was the cue. I pressed the small silver button on my phone. The pre-planned signal Bennett and Emily were waiting for down the street. Within seconds, tires crunched on the driveway. Rick's smirk faltered as the sound of car doors slamming filled the air. What the hell is this? He hissed. Justice, I said quietly. The front door swung open. Attorney James Bennett stepped in first, followed by Sheriff Daniels, a stocky man in uniform whose presence seemed to fill the entire room. Mr. Dalton, the sheriff said, holding up a warrant. We need to have a conversation about fraudulent business filings and homeowner intimidation. Rick's bravado evaporated. You can't just barge into my house. This is her house, Bennett interrupted sharply. And we have enough evidence to prove you've been using HOA funds for personal gain. Rick's face turned crimson. He pushed back from the table, papers scattering to the floor. This is a setup, she's lying. Then you won't mind explaining the contracts with Dalton Property Management LLC, Bennett said, his voice cool and deliberate. Or why you threatened a homeowner with a false foreclosure. The sheriff stepped closer. Hands where I can see them, sir. Rick's composure cracked completely. He pointed at me, spit flying as he yelled, You think you can ruin me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The sheriff took him by the arm, snapping the cuffs on with a click that echoed through the kitchen. Richard Dalton, you're under arrest for fraud, financial misconduct, and harassment. Rick struggled, shouting over his shoulder as they led him out the door. This isn't over, Sarah. You'll regret this. I stood there, shaking, the adrenaline flooding through me like a storm. Bennett placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. You did good, he said softly. You stood your ground. For the first time in months, the air in my house felt lighter. I could breathe again. The weight that had pressed down on me since that first day, the day they tore down my husband's swing, was finally lifting. Outside, I watched from the porch as they placed Rick into the back of the sheriff's cruiser. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the windows, washing the quiet street in color. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Whispers spread fast, but this time, not about me. As the car drove off, Emily's voice crackled through the earpiece Bennett had left on the counter. We got everything, she said. Audio, video, confession. It's airtight. For the first time, I allowed myself to cry. Not from fear, but from release. My kids would sleep safely tonight. I thought of my husband, of that swing, of everything Rick had tried to take from us. Justice finally felt within reach. But peace in Maple Creek never lasted long. The next morning, I opened my curtains and froze. Across the street, leaning against his mailbox, stood Rick Dalton. No uniform, no cuffs, just that same cold smile behind his aviator sunglasses. He'd posted bail. And he was staring right at my house. Motion to remove Richard Dalton as HOA president, Linda declared. The crowd roared. For once, no one feared him. The emergency meeting had drawn more residents than any HOA gathering in Maple Creek's history. Folding chairs filled the town hall, people standing shoulder to shoulder, murmuring with anticipation. The room buzzed with the electric hum of long-suppressed anger finally given a voice. Even the air felt charged, thick with justice overdue. I sat near the back, my palms pressed against my knees, trying to calm the tremor in my hands. Rick sat across the aisle, stone-faced, his once pristine posture now slightly slouched, his jaw tight. No smug grin this time. Just silence. Emily Torres from the County Herald was setting up her camera near the podium. She had the footage cued, every word, every smirk, every damning confession from our staged meeting. Bennett stood beside her, flipping through folders, ready to cite the legal violations on record. When Linda Carter, my once shy neighbor turned quiet hero, stepped up to the microphone, the room fell into absolute silence. She held her head high, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. I hereby motion to remove Richard Dalton as president of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association, she said, her voice clear and firm. Effective immediately. Applause erupted before she could even finish. People who'd avoided eye contact with me for months were now shouting in support. The same neighbors who once whispered "troublemaker" were clapping and chanting, "Vote! Vote! Vote!" Rick stood abruptly, trying to salvage control. "This meeting is out of order," he barked. "You can't." Emily hit play. The speakers crackled, and Rick's own voice filled the room. "We have ways of clearing out the troublemakers," he said in the recording, his tone arrogant, unmistakable. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Then came his laugh, the same one that had haunted me for months. Rick's face drained of color. "That recording was taken illegally," he shouted, pointing at me. Bennett stepped forward, his tone cool and sharp. "Actually, Mr. Dalton, this state is a single-party consent state. Mrs. Miller was fully within her rights to record a conversation she was part of." The audience broke into murmurs again, this time approving, energized. Rick looked around desperately, but no one came to his defense. Even the board members, his loyal puppets for years, sat with their heads down. Legal nugget. Under most state HOA statutes, homeowners can petition for a special election to remove corrupt board members. If the petition reaches a simple majority, the board must hold a vote, and the decision is binding. Linda turned back to the microphone. All in favor of immediate removal, raise your hand. One by one, hands shot up across the room. Dozens, then hundreds. The sea of raised arms glowed under the fluorescent lights like a wave of rebellion. All opposed? Linda asked. Only Rick's hand stayed down. The motion passes, she said. Effective immediately, Richard Dalton is removed from his position as HOA president. The room exploded into cheers. People hugged, some cried. Even the quiet ones who'd been afraid for so long finally smiled. Rick pushed through the crowd, red-faced, muttering threats under his breath as he stormed toward the exit. You'll regret this, he hissed at me as he passed. But his voice didn't carry the same power anymore. It was just noise. Within days, Emily's story aired across local news. HOA president accused of embezzlement and fraud. County investigators launched a full probe into Rick's shell companies, uncovering years of diverted HOA funds. He was formally charged with embezzlement, financial misconduct, and harassment of a homeowner. When the news reached me, I felt an overwhelming mix of triumph and disbelief. I had spent so long surviving, I almost forgot what winning felt like. But just as I allowed myself to breathe, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Crisp, official, heavy with consequence. Subpoena. County Superior Court. They wanted my testimony. The fight wasn't over yet. When I rebuilt the swing, my daughter whispered, "It feels like Daddy's home again." That's when I realized, justice isn't about revenge. It's about peace. The courthouse smelled like old paper and tension. Rows of residents from Maple Creek filled the gallery, their faces tight with anticipation. Even after everything, the raids, the interviews, the headlines, seeing Rick Dalton in person again made my stomach twist. Gone was the polished man in a pressed polo shirt. He looked smaller now, hunched in a gray suit that didn't fit him anymore. The color drained from his face. The bailiff's voice echoed, "The state versus Richard A. Dalton." Rick didn't look at me, though I felt his presence like static in the air. County of Somerset had filed multiple charges: embezzlement, fraud, harassment, and falsification of community records. For weeks, Bennett and the prosecutors had compiled every email, every contract, every minute of the footage we'd captured. It was airtight. When the judge entered, the room stilled. His tone was measured, but the weight of years of corruption hung between every word. "Mr. Dalton," he said, "you have been charged with defrauding the residents of Maple Creek Estates. How do you plead?" Rick's lawyer whispered something in his ear. The silence stretched. Finally, Rick exhaled. "Guilty." A collective gasp moved through the courtroom. Even though we all expected it, hearing the word aloud felt unreal, like watching a monster deflate into a man. The judge nodded gravely. "You are hereby ordered to repay all misappropriated HOA funds to the homeowners, barred permanently from holding any leadership position in a community organization, and placed on probation for 5 years. Bennett placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "That's justice," he whispered. Rick's eyes finally met mine as the deputies led him away. There was no arrogance left in them, only a flicker of something hollow. Maybe regret, maybe resentment. I didn't care which. For once, he couldn't hide behind bylaws, power, or fear. When the gavel struck, a sound of finality filled the room. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until it was over. After court, the crowd followed me outside. Neighbors I'd once thought lost to fear. They shook my hand, hugged me, thanked me for standing up when they couldn't. Linda Carter teared up as she said, "You saved this neighborhood, Sarah." I smiled, though part of me still couldn't believe it was truly done. "We saved it," I told her. Together. Over the following weeks, the story spread beyond Maple Creek. Emily's article hit the front page of the County Herald, then made its way online. Headlines read, "HOA President Exposed in Homeowner Sting Operation." The comments section exploded. Thousands of people from around the country shared their own stories. Corrupt HOAs, fake violations, threats, intimidation. Some thanked me for giving them courage. Others shared advice, photos, and documentation. It was bigger than me now. It was a movement. Still, the moment that mattered most came a few weeks later, when I finally rebuilt the swing. The day was warm, sunlight spilling through the oak tree that had once held the original ropes. The smell of fresh wood filled the air as my son and daughter helped tighten the bolts. When we lifted the seat together, I felt a lump in my throat. The new swing wasn't fancy, just simple wood and rope, but it meant everything. When my daughter sat down and swung for the first time, her laughter rang through the yard like music. "It feels like Daddy's home again," she said softly. I knelt beside her, brushing the hair from her face. "He is, sweetheart," I whispered. "In every swing, every smile." That night, I stood on the porch watching the swing move gently in the breeze. For the first time in months, there were no cameras, no notices, no threats taped to my door. Only peace. The crickets hummed, the stars blinked, and the house that once felt haunted by fear finally felt like home again. If you've ever stood up to an HOA bully, share your story below. You never know who you might inspire. Someone out there might be sitting in the same fear I felt, wondering if fighting back is worth it. Trust me, it is. When you fight for what's right, you don't just protect your home, you protect your dignity. Before turning in that night, I glanced once more at the swing. The ropes creaked gently and the wood caught the glow of the porch light. I whispered, "We did it, Mark," speaking to my husband's memory. "They can't touch us anymore." As I closed the door behind me, my phone buzzed with a new message from Emily. "Ready for the next story?" It read. "A veteran's land nearly stolen by his HOA until the FBI got involved." I smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Maple Creek was finally safe. But somewhere out there, another homeowner was about to face their own battle, and this time they wouldn't face it alone.